lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. Now, across Canada, there are differences in the cancer rate. So, for instance, cancer rates in Nova Scotia and out east tends to be higher than it is for central Canada, with the lowest cancer rates being in British Columbia, which has really important consequences given that out east, for instance, the availability of services may not be as good as in Ontario. Out east, for instance, in Nova Scotia, you've got vast terrains that you got very few hospitals, very few doctors, and the like. In the valley, for instance, you have not a lot of hospitals in the valley. And people have to go very far distances to get medical care. If you're in Annapolis Valley, for instance, you might have to drive an hour all the way up to Kentville in order to get clinical services for your illness. The statistics also show that 63% of all Canadians diagnosed with cancer will survive for at least 5 years after the diagnosis. Now, I know that may sound like the same thing as, oh, after I'm diagnosed with cancer, I only have 5 years. But that's not what the statistics are saying. For the most part, a lot of people get diagnosed very late in the game. So, for instance, a lot of folks get diagnosed after the cancer is spread, not in its early stages. So we know now that if it's diagnosed in its early stages, your life expectancy after diagnosis may be longer than 5 years, right? But on average, most people will survive about 5 years. Today, the ratio or incidence rate of people with cancer in Canada is 1,490 for every 1,000 people. That number is expected to climb modestly over the next couple of years, 10, 15 years, because as the population ages, there will be more people diagnosed with cancer. We also know that as the population ages, more people will die from cancer. Now, what are the types of cancer? And how do I know if I've got any of these types of cancer? The purpose of the show today is not to get into the clinical aspects of cancer. It's just to provide an overview of cancer and how it might affect you in the workplace. And as part of that, we're just going to give a general overview. So if you believe that you have cancer or may be at risk of cancer, you should consult a doctor. But here's some of the types of cancers that are out there. We've got breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, cancer of the throat, nasal cavity cancer, testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, cancer from which one of my aunt died. And I can tell you in that particular case, she bled to death. It's a nasty kind of cancer. Thyroid cancer, penile cancer, and all kinds of cancers. Right? Now, the statistics tell us that more than half of all cancers are preventable. So, for instance, lung cancer is largely preventable, except where we have people who work in an occupation in which they're at risk for lung cancers. Persons who are exposed to asbestos, for instance, people who work in the diesel fuel industry or exposed to diesel fuel for a particular period of time. I think the research tells us that about 10 years or so of exposure to a carcinogen will end up causing the cancer that you may suffer from. Again, Which cancers are on the rise in Canada? Thyroid cancer is on the rise. Liver cancer is on the rise, both in men and women. Lung cancer is on the rise, but curiously, not in men, more so amongst women. Why? Probably because more women are smoking today. Probably because more women are being exposed to the kinds of carcinogens and occupational hazards that result in or are important factors in causing cancer. Bladder cancer is on the rise. Why is that? Because the workforce and the population is aging, and bladder cancer tends to affect people who are over 70, in that range. So again, as the workforce ages, we may see more bladder cancers exhibiting themselves in the workforce. One important statistic that you should be aware of is that while the incidence of cancer overall has remained steady and level, today the incidence of cancer in women continue to be on the rise. Of course, that raises all sorts of questions for us as researchers and for us as policymakers, because at the end of the day, we need to understand why it is that cancer continues to rise in females but has stabilized somewhat in men. Now, in year 2000, cancer was the fourth costliest disease in Canada. It accounted for roughly $15 billion in expenditures. These costs were both direct and indirect. $2.6 billion were direct costs. Those are costs related to physician care and treatment and the like. The remaining had to do with loss of productivity in the workplace. And so, does cancer have anything to do with the workplace? Absolutely. The Canadian Cancer Society tells us that a large portion of the cost associated with cancer has to do with loss of productivity. And the journey for many cancer patients, right, has a lot of emotional, physical, and other life-altering kinds of attitudes that are going to present themselves in the workplace, present challenges for the individual in the workplace, present issues for managers managing people in the workplace, and at the end of the day, will also create issues in terms of rights and responsibilities of individuals as they carry out the tasks for which they were employed in the workplace. So, does cancer have anything to do with the workplace? Absolutely. In the next several weeks, we will explore some of the very key issues that relate to you, cancer, and your workplace. Next time, we will talk about the financial implications for you and your work after you've been diagnosed with cancer. Tune in next week for our next episode. A webisode.
I want you to say something. I want you to say, does win or do you need win in your life? Of course you do. Boom, boom, abbreviation, name of abbreviation. Yeah, you're saying, after you finish the segment here, you're saying, does WINN mean anything to you? Of course it does. I mean, no, WINN, you repeated the abbreviation name, and then you basically saying, yes, it does. We are going to explore cancer in the workplace. Like you're trying to say, this is the confirmation you need.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Now tell me.
Does WINN, Workplace Intelligence News Network, mean anything to you? Absolutely. Why? In the next 13 weeks, you will discover information about you, cancer, and the workplace that you will only get here at WIN. Tune in next week. Have a good night. I'm Winston. No, tune in next week. I'm Winston Manners, your host. Have a good night.